Turning back to our top story, more than 2.1 million people have fled Ukraine since Russia invaded nearly 2 weeks ago. That's according to the United Nations. The UN estimates 516 civilians have been killed in the conflict so far, but the real number could be much higher. What will Europe do to stop Russia's war against Ukraine? I spoke with 4 top diplomats to Canada from the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. We talked about how Europe plans to disconnect from Russian oil and gas and what role diplomacy can play in Putin's war against Ukraine. Well, first of all, I want to thank all 4 of you for making yourselves available for this discussion. I think it's an important one to have, and I appreciate you making the time for it. I wanted to ask each of you, if you could, as succinctly as possible, perhaps in even just one sentence, to describe from your point of view or characterize this moment in European history. High Commissioner, I'll start with you.
Well, I think I'd say it's obviously the largest challenge we've seen to our collective security since the Second World War. But I think if I can say something positive about it, it would be that the unity of purpose that we have all shown in responding to it certainly exceeds what Putin was expecting, and I think is a huge testament to our will to find a solution.
Ambassador Rispal?
I think it's a terrible moment, but as Susan said, it's a moment where we can see this unprecedented unity of Europe, of allies, this very strong transatlantic relationship. So it's scary. Peace is at stake. We are all very worried, but together I think we can act positively.
Ambassador Sparwasser?
I totally agree with what both my friends have said. The 24th of February will go down, I think, in history as a deep, deep sea change, a big change in the history of Europe, European security structure, and it is a challenge for the rule of law, the international rule of law in the world. So it will test our resolve. It's a very dangerous moment in our time, but at the same time, it is encouraging how Europeans and our partners, transatlantic partners, have taken up that challenge.
Ambassador Ferrari.
I'm the last one to talk, so they have said everything. And I agree 2,000% on what my colleagues have said. I mean, if I may add just a little sentence more, is that unprecedented unity and coordination and strength in reacting to what we are all witnessing. In a way, stress the fact that we value those principles more than any other interest in practical and in the different sectors. So we are united and we want to go on with this because we believe and we value those principles which are at the basis of the UN Charter, which are at the basis of the Treaty of Rome, as far as the European Union is concerned, more than any other particular and specific interest in any other field, being energy or, I don't know, commerce or whatever. Democracy, sovereignty, territorial integrity are something and some principles that we have to stick all together and united in order to preserve them.
You mentioned energy, and I have a question for both of you actually around that subject, and I'll start with you, Ambassador, because the Prime Minister is in Germany today, yes. And I listened to the press conference that he and the Chancellor gave following their meeting. Energy was a big subject yes. that was discussed. I'm wondering, and we're also obviously talking about the U.S. ban, the Canadian ban on imports of oil and gas from Russia. Clearly, the calculation in Europe is very different because there is a much heavier reliance, including in Germany, where about 40% of the gas that you import comes from Russia. Hindsight is always 20/20, but looking back and seeing where we are right now, do you think the government should have some regrets about the degree to which that dependence increased under the last 2 chancellors?
I think looking back and looking forward, we're absolutely determined to decrease our dependency from Russia. That is not just a German determination. The EU has now determined to basically cut down its dependency on all fossil fuel supplies from Russia in the very near future. In Germany, we are putting a lot of effort and a lot of money now into finding alternative sources of energy, and we're doing it at the same time trying to do the right kind of things to help us to meet our climate target. And that was the big subject today between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, and I was to be perfectly straight, I was very happy to hear both of them say how committed they are to work together, in particular when it comes to hydrogen, but also other sources of energy. And when it comes to, for example, hydrogen, Canada has all the makings of being a very big hydrogen power. Germany will be one of the big consumers. The EU will be one of the big consumers. And to bring those very like-minded, safe partners together is a real contribution to our future energy security.
Because of the level of dependence that we're referring to here, Ambassador Ferrari, and Italy also, I think, imports about 40% of its gas from Russia as well, there has so far been an unwillingness to do what Canada and the U.S. did, which is obviously a different calculation because of a much lower level of dependence on Russian imports, right? And by that I mean it's not like the EU or your country in particular, let's say, or yours, has come out and said, we are going to ban imports. They've said we can't do that immediately. The effect would be too dramatic. Is that a problem for stopping Putin, though? Just given the amount that energy contributes to that Russian economy, 36%, I believe, of the national budget there. Can you really expect to stop Putin if you can't hit the economy where it hurts?
But we are not doing this. I mean, we are participating, convinced in all the different fora in order to, let's say, put forward any sanction that would be, in a way, as a deterrent towards Putin, including the energy. I mean, I agree with what Sabine has just said, my German colleague. I mean, in the European Union now there is something moving. The pillars of energy and green economy are one of the central of this next generation EU sort of process that we started in the European Union that would see also some changes within the different countries belonging to the European Union as far as, alternative sources of energy, etc.
Those are more long-term, right?
Exactly. But we have different channels of getting this gas in the short term.
So you think Italy, for example, will be able to supplant most of the 40%? Is that?
For the time being, we think we are not going to have major problems until maybe September, October, November this year. We are moving towards a warmer time, in Europe. So maybe the families will need less, let's say, heating in their houses, etc. The stock we have in the resources are enough for the next months. In the meantime, we are exploring different ways from different other countries to enhance let's say the supply we are receiving already from different countries in the world, and also some additional ones. So
it's possible. Okay.
I believe it's possible.
Sanctions are one thing, High Commissioner, and every Ukrainian representative we've interviewed has been very grateful for the actions that we've all just described, that we've heard you describe, you and your colleagues describe. There is one, though, outstanding ask that I know all of you will be familiar with, and it involves a military component. Essentially that NATO countries declare the space above Ukraine a no-fly zone, which amounts to having to shoot down Russian aircraft, and the response from the West, quote unquote, has been that is too escalatory. That would be the beginning of World War III. Is there a point, though, at which you see that answer changing? Is there an action Russia would take where that answer changes?
Well, look, I understand entirely why the Ukrainians are calling for a no-fly zone. The images that we're seeing on our television are abhorrent. But you've said it yourself, there are two reasons why we can't consider a no-fly zone. The first is that it would bring NATO aircraft into direct conflict with Russian aircraft, and that would lead to an escalation, and that simply isn't in any of our interests. And the second is that a no-fly zone would also mean that Ukrainians can't fly over their own country, and that would limit their ability to take action against the Russian troops on the ground. So I don't see us agreeing to a no-fly zone. But all of that said, there are a number of things, of course, that we are doing. So we're mobilising international support for a humanitarian response. We're doing all we can to maximise the economic pressure on the Putin regime through the sanctions package that you've talked about. We just passed new legislation on that through the House in the UK on Monday. We're working very hard with international partners on helping Ukraine mount its own self-defence. So there's a lot of things we can do, but I think that no-fly zone is not one of the things we're going to do.
Ambassador Rispel, there have been no-fly zones established in the past over Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Libya in 2011. Is the difference here that Putin has nuclear weapons?
Probably, but I think that, as has been stated, I mean, the risk of escalation is too big. We cannot take this risk. So that's why we are really trying the diplomacy canal. And my president has been very, very involved and is still involved in trying to prevent a total war, to try to protect Ukrainian people, to try to stop this war. And since the beginning of this attack, he has been talking with Putin 14 times since December. And there is a strong coordination between Emmanuel Macron and his allies within the EU, within the G7, at the UN Security Council. And we are really, really trying very hard to use this diplomacy because we can convey message. And Emmanuel Macron is also talking like every day with Zelensky. And it's very important to keep this canal open. And I know that some people say, what the point of having diplomacy? What the results? And as you know, diplomacy is not just a thing of a day. So we will see in a few days, in a few weeks, in a few months, what the result of diplomacy will be. But it's totally unthinkable not to talk to Putin.
I wonder if the questions that people have when they raise those questions, Ambassador Schaffhauser, is around what happens in the interim. Diplomacy may still work. It's hard to tell with somebody like Putin on the other end of it. But in the meantime, we are witnessing really in real time the horrors of war that have existed in the past, but maybe not as close to us. We watch it every day on the TV with journalists there all the time. And so I think that maybe the genesis of that question around, is there a military, could there or should there be a military solution, is because diplomacy, yes, it may work, but it might take time. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I fully would refer to what Susanna said a little bit earlier. It is absolutely heartbreaking and unbearable to watch what's happening. And right now, on my way here on the radio, it said that an attack on Kiev is probably imminent. At the same time, an escalation would not solve this. An escalation would not end the attacks. Ukraine would still be the theater, but it would be a theater of an even larger war, an even larger escalation. And NATO has not been, if you want, involved right now. NATO is protecting the NATO territory, the eastern flank of NATO territory, but has taken great care not to be a partner in this conflict, or an adversary, rather, in this conflict. It would make things even worse. As devastating as what we're seeing is, it could be even worse if it turned into a fully fledged world war. And, with all the potential also, you've mentioned it, of nuclear weapons being used, tactical nuclear weapons being used, for example.
We are here to try to deter and to try to avoid escalation, to try to not to be the same as the aggression or the aggressor. We are using all the instruments that are at our disposal, like sanctions, for instance, and we are maybe as never in the history before now passing, I don't even remember the number of sanctions that the European Union has passed, some hundreds of different kind of sanctions, and not only the European Union, but also, our Euro-Atlantic, let's say, allies. This is something that is going to hit, and is hitting already, the Russia.
But it hasn't stopped him. I think that's what the counter is, right?
But
he just gets more aggressive.
But maybe you have to see the final result I mean, you have to have faith. You have to not to stop the dialogue, even though, as Sabine said, we understand, we are there, we suffer. And as your Deputy Prime Minister just said from Berlin, I mean, looking at those scenes, it's horrible. But our goal is to try to end this sort of horrible and dramatic sort of scene with the less casualties possible. In the European Union, we passed a very important decision, that ease, in a way, the possibility of receiving refugees, for them to stay and move for 90 days within the European Union territory, and then decide where to settle. And these are the things that are, in a way, showing, on the one hand, I mean, I was going to use the term humanity, but this is normal for countries that are, in a way, involved because they believe in those principles, I would say before. And on the other hand, using what the treaties and the different organizations, international organizations in the world are giving us to put pressure on the leadership of Russia, not the population, because we are close also to the Russian population. They are protesting, they are demonstrating by thousands in different towns in that country, and this is something that may lead.
They are protesting, but like I said, we still see Putin increasing his level of aggression. And I think maybe the existential question, especially at this table, is: do you think, and I'll start with you, High Commissioner, that it ends with Ukraine for Putin?
Well, I think your Prime Minister was in London this week for a meeting with Boris Johnson and also with the Dutch Prime Minister. And the thing that they agreed there was that we cannot allow Putin to succeed in Ukraine. And it's really important that he fails and is seen to fail. And that's because we really recognise that we can't allow the creeping normalisation of the kind of things that he's doing. So my Prime Minister has announced a 6-point plan for how we go about tackling this. And this talks a bit to your point earlier about whether diplomacy is enough. I think it's really important to say that diplomacy is not the totality of what we're doing. Across all of the allies, we've got a really serious package of measures in place. So that's a serious package of humanitarian support, provision of medicine, food, clothes, welcoming of refugees. It's putting maximum pressure on Putin and the Kremlin to really make them feel the pain. And I think he miscalculated and didn't realise how serious we were when we said that we were going to do that. It's the provision of lethal weapons. But beyond that, it's also thinking about diplomacy to provide a means for de-escalation, but importantly, with the agreement and consent of the legitimate Ukrainian government. So I think that package of things actually far exceeds what anybody expected to see.
Do you think, one second, I'll get it. Do you think, Ambassador Riesfeld, that it is enough to deter, like enough for the Ukrainians to be successful? I guess that is my question. Do you think the Ukrainians can be successful?
I don't know, because the military balance is really difficult to evaluate from far away. We have said, and we will put a high cost for Putin for doing what he is doing. So Russia will pay the price, and even us, Europeans, we are ready to pay the price of freedom, of democracy. So we know it will have a cost, but we are all ready to fight for democracy, for our principle, for Ukrainian integrity, territorial integrity, sovereignty. And at the end of the day, Russia and Ukraine will have to speak together and to find a way to live together. I don't know how we can find a solution, but this solution has to be approved by the Ukrainian government, by the Ukrainian people, and that's where diplomacy will take all its weight. But since then, we will all suffer, and especially Ukrainian people. We know that there is a cost. And the sanctions, I mean, they are unprecedented. They were immediate. They are broad. And we see that the financial system in Russia is on the verge of shrinking and collapsing. So, yeah, there is already a price that Putin has to pay. And he needs to know that it's not over, it's not finished.
I just have about a minute left, and I want you've all talked about the significance of diplomacy, to no one's surprise, because you are all diplomats. There is a back and forth in this country about whether the Russian ambassador should be expelled. Ambassador Ferrari, what do you think about that?
I really don't want to comment on this, if you allow me. You know, would be a decision of the Canadian government. But if you allow me, I would like just to add a little thing to what Susanna was saying before. We didn't underline maybe enough the fact that on the 2nd of March, the General Assembly of the United Nations reached an enormous consensus on a resolution, which is maybe unprecedented again. I mean, 141 members voted in favor, 35 abstentions and 5 against, you know. And this is one enormous, in my opinion, achievement, political achievement, that shows how diplomacy, negotiation, sharing, you know, the same values, the same purpose, you know, in doing some international action and initiatives means. And this also is isolating even more, you know, the Russian government.
And I take all of that, and I think, again, that's why I wanted to do this, because the unification is truly something to stand back and take note of. I think from a layman's perspective, someone outside the diplomatic world, though, you know, yes, the UN is in agreement more than ever before. Yes, European allies are in agreement more than ever before. But still, we see, you know, it's not a rational actor that anyone's dealing with, right? And so I guess my final question is the same one to you. Do you ultimately, Ambassador Sparvasser, think that the Ukrainians can be successful?
Well, they have been much, much more successful up to now than we ever imagined that it was possible. And I think by the assessment of so many people, experts, military experts, but also geostrategic experts, Russia has already lost an awful lot in this war. It's being ostracized. It was, as Andrea said, it was together with North Korea, Syria, amongst the 5 states who voted against that resolution.
Belarus and Eritrea.
It has been downgraded in its financial sort of trustability to nearly rubbish level. I think the loss of the Ukrainian people is heartbreaking, but Russia is losing too, big way.
Okay, on that note, I will leave it there. I appreciate, as I said, all of you making the time for this. Very nice to have you. And I wanted to wish you, Ambassador Rispal, a very fond farewell. You're leaving at the end of the week. Thanks for your time here in Canada, and best wishes in the future.
Well,
thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.